Hello, friends, and welcome back. We are in episode 4 of our foundation tutorial series for ZOAPIIO. So, in the last episode, we had built one sample web service configuration, which was providers. And here we saw how we have created the request, response, and the definitions and the declarations. So now we have gone ahead and created all the other services, uh, the split locations, split codes, and split bookings. These are the services we're going to require. First, we're going to fetch the nearby locations. We're also going to fetch the providers in the area. Then, based on the information we capture from the user, we're going to get codes, and then finally, we're going to request a booking. Now, the web services that we're calling have been configured. Now we have to create a layer of messages that our API will have. So before we start building those APIs, we've also gone ahead and created some request and response messages of our own. Okay. So here the names that you see beginning with split, they are the split uh, definitions. Then we have created some structures of our own. These are created manually in the sense you do a right click, do a new tag, type the name, type the properties. So because we don't have any structure available to us, so we just went ahead and did this manually. Here we use some cryptic names, but that's all right. You can create whatever names you like. So we have a response for the codes. So that's the response that our API is going to send. So let's just walk through the fields. It's a QID is a code ID. It's another ID. PID is provider ID. JID is the joint ID, which is a combination of the code ID and the ID of that specific provider, I think. We will see what these are. So it requires multiple IDs. There's a currency, type, class, name. This is the vehicle. The description of the vehicle, capacity, what's the lower price. This is an estimate, and upper range of the estimate. Similarly, we have a booking response type after we've done the booking. So we've done these details. And then okay, ignore this. This is not here. Now we look at this response node. Here we've defined all the responses. So for the quotes, we are simply referring to the type node. For the booking, also we are referring to the type node. But there's some definition that we have directly created, like locations. Instead of using a type node and then referring to it, we just created it directly here. So these are the locations. Similarly, for the providers, we've done the same. Okay, so now we have these are the response structures for all the APIs. And these are the request structures. So this is defined under as request. So this is the request we will be getting from the consumers of our API, which is the front end. So we have the lat, long, date and time of travel. PID is the provider ID, JID is the joint ID, P is the booking ID, and this is the customer. And first name, last name, email, phone, customer ID, and MO ID. These are basically uh, some fields that we populate just so that we have a cross reference with the supplier. Okay. So there we go. We've got all the structures in place. Now we can start writing our services. So how do we do that? First thing we do is we create an entry point, which is obviously what we are doing. We are writing a service that we're going to provide. Now let's start by the URL path. So the URL path for web service, the convention, it's not a convention, it's actually a requirement. It has to start with slash WC. That's how we identify this as a REST service or a HTTP service. So for all types of entry points like SOAP, it must start with WS. So this is our configuration, which tells the system as to when this request comes, how it should be processed. And we always put the name of the project in the path. This is important because if you are building multiple projects, right, but the namespace of the service URLs is the same. Okay, so if you create a service which is, let's say, WC slash providers, and you happen to have the same URL in another project, then you're going to get a conflict. So it's always a recommended practice to have your name of your project as a path of the URL, and then obviously the service name. Here the response type is going to be JSON. The other options we have are XML, text, binary, and file data. The request path in our case, it is the request node itself. So we will leave this blank because that's the default. But we could have picked a different name. Now the response path is the the response node. Okay, so for each of the services, we have a sub node. So what we'll do is we'll just take this response and drag and drop it here. So that becomes our response path. Okay, all the services that we develop will have the same response path. Internally, each response will get one of these. Now, in our case, the request parameters we are going to accept as JSON because the default front end that we have in ZOAPIIO, it uses post JSON. And but of course, you're free to use something else. If you are having a different front end that uses a different format, you're free to choose it. Now, one more thing is we will create a trace logger. It's a convenient thing because when we build this web service and we run it, we encounter errors, we can just look at this log. That logger is available to us from the web, right? And then just let's save it. Okay, so that's it. So now we have configured an entry point, which means if we fire this URL, which means we use the base path of our instance followed by this service is going to be invoked. Now, now we start writing the code for this. So what we do is we drag and drop this into the main window and we get a blank designer screen. Now, because this is the first time we're building any service, we just want to do a like really kind of a hello world thing, just to get you started with how this service would execute. So let's say I'm going to this service will return the providers, right? So this is the node. So what we'll say is compute slash providers slash ID is equal to, let's say, 100. We just start coding a value slash response slash providers slash ID is equal to 100. What we're doing is we're just putting a value in this particular field, and that's it. That's all we do. And let's do a deploy. Now we come back here, and here we see that this is there. We can say test the service. So these are all the inputs. We can put values in there. This we're going to we can use get, but since it's a post service, let's change it to post. Content type is application JSON, and let's do this run service. Okay, so this is the response we get from the service. And if you actually took this URL, typed it in the browser, you will also get the same response. So here we're getting, the system puts a little wrapper around the actual response. So here we have the providers, which is where we put the value, and ID is 100. Okay. So this is just to give you an idea as to how you write a service and how you test it. Okay. So we go back. Now we just throw it away. And what we have to do here is we have to actually call the split service. So what we do is there is a web service here, says split providers. Here it is, and we drag and drop it here. Then here we get an option as to what we want to do with it. We can do an asynchronous call of this web service, or we can do a synchronous call. So in our case, we will do a synchronous call because we cannot proceed until we have the response from the service. So we do a sync call. Okay. So system puts in a little line of code here which says sync call, the name of the service, and the request and the response nodes are the same ones that we had, which we had created during the configuration. Now there is no requirement for you to actually use that really these same names. You can use something else. But as I said, this is only a convention. I could type some other name that would work as well. So before we call this service, we need to do a couple of things. First thing is we need to do a compute. And we need to assign a value to the header. And without the header, it will not work. So we need to say slash headers slash authorization equals, and we need to put a value, and this value will be the same value that we are required to get authorized. And also before doing this, we need to provide the values of the latitude and longitude. So what we do is we take the request node, which is this provider's argument. I can drop it here. And here we're going to say use compute. So what this does is it creates a little structure. Now we can create all this manually. We can go to the blocks, for example, drag and drop this node. We can do compute, drag and drop, doing this. But this is a shortcut of saying that we want to populate this structure. So just generate a little compute. We'll throw this away. Here we are not providing any value for the departure date. I think there's a typo. That's okay. Delete. Now here we need to provide a value to the latitude, and this value will be what we received as input in the request node. So we will say this value is same as slash request slash lat this slash request slash longitude. So now before calling this service, we have populated the values from the input that we received, and we are forwarding in this format. And then this will call this. So this should pretty much be sufficient for the call. Now, after the call has completed, we need to process the results. Okay. So now you will take the response node, which is providers RS. I'm going to drag and drop it here, and again we will say compute. So what this does, it takes the entire structure and kind of just fills it the initial skeleton. And now we can do whatever we want. So here this is the response. Within that there is a array of providers. So first we have a with, which means we want to do with this node, and then we have a for each, which means iterate over all the providers. And perhaps it's a good time to tell you about what this index, the loop variable means. So every time you use a loop or a with, you can assign a local variable, sorry, a loop variable, which you define under variables. Okay, so we have some predefined variables here. Okay, so now what this means is then as this loop progresses, this number will automatically be updated to the current loop number. So this is a handy way of dealing with which particular iteration we are in. Okay. So now what we need to do is we need to take these values. Okay, another thing, features. We're not interested in features, so we're just going to delete it. Um, let's look at what we have in our response. The providers, just ID, name, and logo, really. So ID, name, and logo. Region ID. You can always come back, and if you decide to have more fields in your response, you add them to your response, come back and add a compute, and fine. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another with the sorry, we go to blocks, we do a width, and we add it here, and we just move everything in here. And what we're going to say is we're going to say with slash response slash provider. Okay, just looking for the responses. Yeah, providers. And I'm going to put an index here 0. What this means is that this providers is actually, if you look, it's an array, which means the duplicate property is checked, which means there can be multiple providers in the response. Okay. So here, when I say response slash provider 0, it means always create a new one. So every time this name is referenced, it creates a new providers node. Now here, what we're saying is that create a new node, and then with that, do certain computations. So we're going to say, just bear with me, I'm going to say ID is equal to provider ID. I'll come back and change because this is actually invalid. You may also get a syntax error. Yes, we did. Name is equal to name, and logo is equal to logo. Yeah. So what we're saying is that when we say ID, it is this field is implied to be in the nearest context node, which is response slash provider 0. So it refers to this ID. Now we have to copy a value of provider ID, which is in the scope of variable j here. Okay. So here what we're going to do a little trick here. We're going to say slash dollar $j slash. This means is we don't need a loop variable here. What we're saying is that the value of ID, which refers to the nearest context node, which is the provider 0, and every time this loop is entered, it's going to create a new provider node. So we will end up creating an array. And then we're copying the provider ID of the context node for the loop variable j. Slash dollar $j. This one didn't show any error because logo also happens to be a name available in the nearest context. So it's also we change the property. This is all we need to do really as the basic coding to call the service. Now let's see if it actually worked. Okay, so we say file and we say deploy. So hope you got a good idea of how the programming in ZOAPIIO works. It's really mostly drag and drop. You can put in Java code. For example, there's actually a command called Java where you can type, you can actually write Java in it. There is also a mechanism called the method, which you can use to actually write a bigger piece of Java code. So this I'll sign off from this episode now, and in the next episode we'll come back and test this service and do other services. Thank you. I'll see you in the next episode.